Namo Buddhaya, and Jai Bhim to Diksha, and anybody else. So I'm going to dedicate this talk to the Triratna Unlimited project, which is, after all, a manifestation of the Buddha's enlightenment. And I know that today all our dana is going to the Triratna Unlimited. It's a project that's very, very dear to me. I know how much people have benefited from the men's ordination process and Padmaloka, which not only gives an opportunity for people to train for ordination, but it gives an opportunity for people who've not been ordained to have much more intimate contact with the ordination teams, which is a great accelerant of their spiritual life in general. And also is another manifestation of what I've been talking about this week, the semi-monastic life. So I think that the new Triratna Loka, which is just about to land, will greatly enhance our whole movement, of course, especially the women's wing of it. So this talk is for Triratna Unlimited, as a manifestation of the Buddha's enlightenment. So, of course, today is Vaisākha Pūrṇimā. It's the Indian month of May, June, because there's a lunar calendar. So according to the lunar calendar, this full moon, which was actually 2 days ago, is the full moon of the month Vaisākha. And it's the day that is traditionally understood to be that on which the Buddha gained enlightenment. So, of course, we know quite a bit about the Buddha's enlightenment, about his teaching, and so forth. But as Parama Bodhi sort of suggested, what is not so widely known is that we have actually the Buddha's words from his enlightenment. It's an ancient tradition in Buddhism which goes back to the Buddha, that at the moment that people have their major breakthrough, they give utterance to their experience. There's famously two collections, the Thera and the Theri Gata, the songs of the elder brothers, elder sisters, which are sometimes quite short, sometimes much longer, but they're what poured out at the moment when people had their great breakthrough. And you also get this sort of tradition with the songs of Milarepa. You get it very much in the Zen tradition. All Buddhist traditions have this tradition of manifesting realization in spontaneous words. And it's interesting that these are almost always verse. Almost always, I'd say 90% of them are verse, which is quite interesting because it suggests that verse is somehow more primal, closer to direct experience, because, of course, verse is connected with song, with rhythm. So it emerges naturally and spontaneously. And the Indian languages, and particularly Pali at that time, has a natural rhythmic quality to it. So it's very easy to turn it into a sort of rhythm. Tibetans like that too. It just sort of naturally bum-ti-bum-ti-bum, as it were. Much more difficult with English to speak in that way, which is interesting in itself. So I'm going to start by reading you the words of the Buddha. I'm not going to read them in English. I'm going to read them in what was probably the language of the Buddha. Even if you can't understand, some of those who speak Hindi, Gujarati, Punjabi, Bengali, other North Indian languages may recognize some of it. I understand a bit of Hindi and Marathi, and I can definitely grasp something of it. But even if you don't, just sort of feel, these are the words of the Buddha. This is what the Buddha said to himself after his enlightenment. I'm not a Pali scholar, so forgive my pronunciation and so forth, not that any of you will know any better. I should have just said, this is perfect, but let's give it a go. It's in a rhythm, It's 8 beats to a line, and you may be able to hear that if I can successfully capture it. Anek jati sangsarang, sandavisang anibisang, gaha gavisanto, dukkha jati puna punang. Gaha karaka ditosi, puna geha nakasi, sabete fasuka bhaga, gaha kutang visankatang, visankara gatang chitang, tanhanang kayama jaga. So these are the words that came spontaneously to the Buddha underneath the Bodhi tree. He later reported what had come to him to Ananda, who was his recording machine, if you like. The Buddha had a pact with him that whatever he said when Ananda wasn't present, he would report to Ananda. So the story, true or not, doesn't matter, but it's a good story. The story is that later he told Ananda these spontaneous verses that came to him. So I'm going to read them to you in the English translation by our teacher, Urgyen Sangharakshita. They come from the Dhammapada, which some of you will know of, which is probably one of the most famous collections of the Buddha's words. It's a collection, you could say, of aphorisms, short sayings, just verses of 4 lines in that same meter. And some of them are very powerful indeed. And it's generally thought that parts of the Dhammapada come from a very early phase of Buddhism. The scholars can tell from the grammar and so on. So we're right at the heartbeat of early Buddhism. So this is a translation by our own teacher. Many a birth have I undergone in this process of faring on in the round of conditioned existence, seeking the builder of the house and not finding him. Painful is such repeated birth. O house builder, now you are seen. Never again shall you build me a house. Your rafters are all broken, your ridgepole shattered. The conditioned mind too has gone to destruction. One has attained to the cessation of craving. So it encapsulates the Buddha's insight. In a way, it's a short statement of Buddhism, of the Dharma. It's a pithy statement of the Buddha's understanding. So I'm going to go through it bit by bit. But before I do that, I'm going to read it to you again, because it always takes some time to tune in. Many a birth have I undergone in this process of faring on in the round of conditioned existence, seeking the builder of the house and not finding him. Painful is such repeated birth. O house builder, now you are seen. Never again shall you build me a house. Your rafters are all broken, your ridgepole shattered. The conditioned mind too has gone to destruction. One has attained to the cessation of craving. Okay, let me unpack it for you if you need it. In a way, it's pretty plain, but it might take you some time to focus on it. But its message is really quite clear, certainly if you have some awareness of Buddhist teaching. So, first of all, many a birth have I undergone. Actually, the Pali is anek jati, not just one birth have I wandered in samsara. So samsara means the round of continuous existence, the unending process of conditioned existence. I ran into trouble, I mentioned this yesterday. I ran into trouble when I first went to India because there are lots of false friends. When you know some Pali and Sanskrit, in certainly Marathi and Hindi, some words in Pali and Sanskrit have changed their meaning in modern Indian languages. So I had a lot of trouble with Vedana, which is generally translated as feeling, but in Marathi and Hindi it generally means painful feeling. So, I confused people mightily. And then samsara, which, as a Buddhist, I know is the contrast with nirvana. But in modern Indian languages, mainly it sort of means your family and your business. So, I was telling people, you've got to leave samsara. Fortunately, nobody listened to me, as usual. Yes, it's the Buddha's saying that I've not done this just once. This isn't my first rodeo. I've done this again and again and again. And of course, there's a background to this, at least according to the commentary. So that the sutras and the scriptures have commentaries which are sort of non-canonical traditions about verses and suttas. So the commentary on this verse in the Dhammapada says that in the first watch of the night, on the eve of Vaisākha Pūrṇimā, the Buddha had a sudden breakthrough, and which enabled him to see all his past lives. Because according to Buddhist tradition, we have the capacity to know our past lives. Is when we're reborn, for most of us at least, a sort of door comes down, a veil comes down, so we can't see what went before. For some people, it remains open. Even some children, it remains open for some time. And studies have been made of that phenomenon, which are quite suggestive of the truth of rebirth, or again, becoming in the Buddhist terminology. So in the first watch of the night, he realized all his previous births. So he could see that again and again and again, he'd been round the wheel. Again and again and again. And he could see what it signified. And one imagines he had a strong sense, we're not told this, I'm not going to do this again. I'm fed up with this. It's tiresome. Even with your own habits in this life, you do it and then you think, I'm not going to do that again. And round it comes again. We do the same things. We repeat patterns again and again. But actually, this life is a repeated pattern from past lives, influenced from our past lives. So in the first watch, the Buddha saw this. In the second watch, he saw other beings going through the same process. So he saw the whole of samsara as this process of again and again repeating birth, death, birth, death. Some happiness, some pain, again and again and again. But he says a bit more than that, but I'll come to that in a moment because I must mention the third watch of the night, which is when he got it. He understood how this process came about. We're going to see later how it came about, so hold your horses. You probably know already if you know your Buddhism, but he saw why this process goes on and what you have to do to stop it. And of course, in Buddhism, stopping this process of repeated becoming does not mean disappearing into complete darkness. It means entering a greater light, you could say, to use that metaphor. So he says, many a birth have I undergone in this process of faring on. Faring on is Bante's translation of samsara, in the round of conditioned existence. That's samsara. Seeking the builder of the house and not finding him. That feeling? What is it all about? Why am I here? Why am I going through this all over again? Yeah, when you're happy and it's all going your way, when samsara is blowing the way you want it to blow, you don't think about it. But it doesn't always do so. And even when it is, sometimes you can't help sort of wondering, why? I think for me it was a sense I got in my teens. I remember Nietzsche talking about this in an essay called Schopenhauer's Educator, in which he says, what young person has not awoken in the middle of the night thinking, there must be something more. What is this for? and probably everybody's felt this. Certainly for me, it's why I'm here. I wanted an answer to that. And I can well imagine that's the case for many, if not all of you. You're not satisfied, and you've been given various answers, but they don't do it. They're not convincing, or they don't change anything. They explain everything, but they don't change it. The philosophers have interpreted the world in many ways. The point, however, is to change it. Karl Marx. He had some pretty good lines. So you're seeking the builder of the house. So this is a central image of the text, that this existence is a house. So I, right now, am, as it were, a house. So what is a house? Of course, it's something for living in. But a house is something constructed, something put together, something that has various parts that, as it were, lean together and form a whole, but which are constructed. They're not pre-existing, they're not self-existent, they are, constructed. They've been put together. So this self, this body-mind complex, this world that I've created and inhabit, is a house which I live in. I have a very strong sort of connection with the symbol of the house. I think it's because when I was growing up, my parents bought a very large Victorian house which was falling to pieces and they couldn't afford to keep up. But we all worked really hard to maintain it, and that's where I learned to work. But so that I realised many dreams I have are about houses, yeah? And the house has a sort of a very strong symbolic meaning. It's a sort of home, it's stability, it's safety, it's security. But actually houses go. And then a new house comes. And then you become attached to that, and so on. So the house becomes a metaphor for me in my world. And so the Buddha is here saying that he's lived life after life. And during those lives, he's tried to find out why this particular manifestation of conditions has come about. What has generated it? Why am I, as it were, condemned to do it again and again and again? Yes, but many a lifetime he's been reborn, sought the builder of the house, but not been able to find it. You get that sense from the Buddha, don't you, that the urgency of the quest is, by the stage of his last life, unstoppable. You remember he first of all goes to Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputra, who were presumably sort of Shramanic teachers of a kind of, some sort of philosophical, mystical approach. And he found them wanting. He did everything they taught him. He realized what they taught, got to the point where they invited him to join them in leading their sects, but he knew that wasn't it. He hadn't found the house builder, so he wasn't willing to stop there. Then he tried the time-honoured Indian method of extreme austerity, tapasya, of, in effect, torturing his body, so that trying to subdue his body so that the mind was released. But of course, what he realised was, if he went on as he'd started, he was going to die. He's starving. He famously said that when he went to rub his belly, he touched his backbone. And when he rubbed his skin, the skin began to come off in flakes. And he said that I was down to 1 grain of rice a day. And he said, you shouldn't think a grain of rice was any bigger then than it is now. So he tried, the methods that were available to him in India at that time. And he'd found that they did not tell him who the house builder was, and therefore they didn't end this inexorable round of rebirth upon rebirth. And then he sort of comments on this whole process. Painful is such repeated birth. Painful is such repeated birth. Now, of course, it's not that life is always painful. It's important to know this. Sometimes people see Buddhism as telling us that life is suffering. Well, you know it isn't. It has its moments of joy, it certainly has its moments of pleasure, but suffering is, as it were, interwoven. It's always there. In Buddhist analysis, it's said there are 3 levels of suffering. Dukkha is the word. It's not quite suffering. There's actual pain, when somebody sticks a pin in you or you burn your hand in a fire. There's the pain of, as it were, psychological insecurity. You don't always get what you want. Isn't there a song about that? Cue for the Rolling Stones. And I can't get no satisfaction. Anyway, the Rolling Stones were not masters of Dhamma. But yes, there's an experience we repeatedly have of not getting what we want, of losing what we have and want, of getting what we don't want, what is painful, and not being able to get rid of the pain that we already have. So this is called parinama dukkha, the dukkha that comes from the change, transformation. Because everything's changing, you can never achieve within samsara, within conditioned existence, a completely satisfactory arrangement. You can go on arranging the deck chairs on the deck of the Titanic, but the iceberg is coming. You can't make it perfect. And if you've got any awareness, any sensitivity, you can't avoid recognizing that, at least from time to time. This quest to rearrange samsara so it's completely satisfactory to me is doomed. It cannot work. It can work for a moment or two, but it can't endure. By definition, it can't, because everything changes. But there's another dukkha which is much deeper, which is probably more what the Buddha is getting at, although no doubt he includes these higher levels, as it were, more superficial levels, which is called sankhara dukkha. We're going to see this word sankhara again later on, which is the pain of being conditioned. The way I understand this is that we all have an idea of ourselves. We live in a certain world, a certain construction of things, and that can never fully express what we are most deeply. I often get the image of a lion in a cage in a zoo, maybe even a big cage, and it's getting everything it wants, it's being fed whatever it needs and so forth, it's being protected, but you see them just, it's painful to see it, isn't it? They're just wandering from bar to bar to bar. It's horrible. And in a way, we're like that, because we create a prison of existence. We create boundaries within which we confine ourselves. So we condition ourselves. Of course, we take that conditioning from around us and add it to our own construction. But to be conditioned is by definition to have a deep sense of unfulfillment, which mostly we try to palliate by getting pleasure on the other levels, as it were, physical pleasure and trying to get an adequate situation. We're amazing. We're always running away from dukkha. We're trying to stay one pace ahead of dukkha. But dukkha is always coming up behind us. Dukkha meaning suffering, pain, unfulfillment, dissatisfaction, and so on. So we're always trying to find a way not to experience dukkha. But the Buddha's saying, I've been trying to find out where it comes from, what has brought it about, why I constantly condition myself, why I place myself in a house which I can't get out of, if you see what I mean. You know, your house defines you. it constricts you, constrains you in a certain sense. Of course, I'm restricting the metaphor of the house in one way. But yes, he's saying that to be conditioned is implicitly painful. It's as if you can't stretch fully, you can't manifest all your energy. Remember that when you were young? Or maybe you remember it now. But I remember so well when I was young, just this sort of feeling, I've got energy, but I can't express it. The life around me just will not take it. It's not adequate to me, as it were. But I didn't know who I was or what it was that was confining me. So yes, the Buddha is saying, I've been doing this again and again and again. I've been trying to see how it's coming about, who the house builder is, who's building all this, and it's painful. It's implicitly painful. Yeah, there's pleasure. You have a good meal every now and again or whatever. And there are other pleasures. There are even pleasures that are very positive. And you can reach points where you kind of got everything sorted, but it cannot endure. And always underneath that, even in your moments of greatest happiness and pleasure and greatest security, there's a deeper rhythm that is beating under the surface, which is saying there has to be more, there has to be more. So, yes, that's that sort of sense of confinement that the Buddha tried to resolve in his quest for enlightenment. And that this is giving expression to his recognition of the situation, his recognition that he had achieved liberation. So the next verse is, O house builder, now you are seen. Interesting, the choice of seeing. You see the house builder lurking, sneaking up to try to build it all over again. Never again will you build me a house. I've seen you. You can't do it again. So what is the house builder? Well, traditional Buddhism says that the house builder is craving. Craving for some sort of something within conditioned existence, some arrangement within conditioned existence, which we think will make us fully and completely and finally happy. But we long for that. We see things which we believe, if we have them, will give us that sort of satisfaction. Of course, some of that's quite superficial. It's momentary. Like, if you're craving for food, even if in the middle of it you're craving, you kind of know that it's just going to go. But at the same time, there is a sort of belief that somehow this will fulfill me, which is weird, really, because our whole experience is that it doesn't. And yet we sort of are driven by that. We're addicted. That's what it comes down to. There are addictions, not just to drugs and drink and so forth. There are addictions to so many things in life which we think are necessary to our fulfillment, and which, even though our experience tells us again and again they're not, we continuously look for, we chase after. So the Buddha's seen, it's this craving. It's not just craving on a superficial level, craving for a nice taste or cravings for a certain situation. It's just craving to be something. Of craving is bhava raga. I mentioned this yesterday with the mitras. Some of you will have been there. Raga means craving. Bhava means being or becoming. So it means really a state. We long for a state in which we know who we are, we know what we are, we know where we stand in relation to others. Oddly, it can be a very painful state, but still we long for it because it affirms us, it defines us, and it releases us, at least momentarily, from this inexorable drumbeat of dukkha, of unfulfillment. So yes, the deepest craving is to be in a state, to be something, to have a status, to have an identity through which you can face the world. There's positive meanings to identity too, but here I'm talking something much more existential. To define yourself. So I know who I am, and I know who I am in relation to others, and so on. That's at the root of everything. In fact, in Buddhist tradition, it's said that when we die, we, of course, leave behind the body, but there's a continuity of consciousness. It's not exactly my consciousness, but you go through a series of processes, which I won't describe now, in which ultimately you find yourself sort of driven by karma, your previous actions, and you long for a body. You long for some stability, because in the after-death state, everything is completely open. There's no boundaries, but you can't stabilize in that. You don't have an affinity with it. You don't have a training in it. You haven't been to the LBC. You can't sort of make sense of what's happening. And so you want a body. You want to be somebody. You want to be in a body again, and the body that you want is the one that sort of suits your nature, your consciousness. So you find yourself back in a human body, if that's your fate, if you're lucky. So be careful. So yes, we're all here because of craving for existence, craving to be something, to be somebody. I in relation to other, as distinct from other. I want to know who I am, and I crave something that will affirm my identity. So the Buddha goes on, because we're talking about a house, aren't we? So your rafters are all broken. I don't know how much you all know about building, but a building, let's say a double pent roof. There's, two slopes like that, and there's rafters, and the rafters rest on a ridgepole. It's a lump of wood, or these days often a steel beam, that supports the rafters onto which the roof is put. So, yes, your rafters are all broken, because the rafters keep the rain out, after all. They keep the roof on, keep the rain out. And the ridgepole is shattered. It's gone, it's lost its shape, it's lost its purpose, it's lost its place in things. So the commentary says that the rafters are all our kleshas, all our cravings, all our negative mental states, all our longings, all our desires, all our hates, and our ignorance, and so forth, or as it were, more superficial ignorance. The ridgepole is ignorance itself, our failure to recognize the nature of the situation, the fact that this existence is merely conditioned, and that it cannot give us real, deep, lasting satisfaction. So that once ignorance is shattered, of course, wisdom shines out. We must look at it from that point of view too. Once the wisdom shines out, well, the kleshas, the unskillful mental states, all those things that bind us into samsara, just go. They have no basis, because they come out of our ignorance of things. We crave things because we believe they will satisfy. We hate things because we believe their removal will make us happy and secure. So once you've had wisdom, all of that just disappears. It just evaporates. And the house, as it were, falls apart. It absorbed into the blue sky, you could say. So yes, you've seen the house builder. Once you've seen the house builder, the house just shatters, falls apart, the roof falls in. It no longer binds you, it no longer confines you. Wisdom can shine. So the last two lines are, the conditioned mind too has gone to destruction. It's a bit difficult to translate, and looking at different translations, they approach it from different points of view. But the point is what prevents us from seeing reality is all the conditioned processes that make us up, all the ways in which we condition our minds, so that we see our minds through all kinds of patterns and habits, and all sorts of views and understandings. And when the builder of the house is seen, all those samskaras disappear. So you remember the third kind of dukkha is sankhara dukkha, samskara dukkha. That means the dukkha that comes from being conditioned. So the Buddha is saying, at this point, once he's seen the builder of the house, once the house has fallen apart, he's seen through the conditioned mind, the conditioned aspect of the mind, and it's destroyed. It's broken. It no longer works. It no longer defines you. You no longer have to have a self. You no longer have to have an identity. You no longer have to have an interpretation of things. You're completely at ease. Mind isn't destroyed. Mind is not destroyed, but mind becomes completely open. Another point in the Pali Canon, the Buddha says that in the Pali, "Pabasanang idang chittang." This mind is luminous or radiant. This mind is radiant, but it's covered over by adventitious defilements, kleshas, adventitious misunderstandings, passions in the negative sense, and so forth. So the luminosity of our minds, the natural luminosity of our minds, which is the nature of awareness. Awareness itself is naturally luminous, but we construct, as it were, a carapace of self, made up of habits and beliefs and unskillful activity, even skillful activity, you might say. Bhante once said, it's not that we have habits, we are a habit. This habit of I obscures, well, you could say, what I really am, but you don't have to think I. It obscures mind itself, the natural radiance of my mind, of your mind, of this mind here, not some other mind. So a lot of what we have to do is learn to see those obscurations and get rid of them. Some of those obscurations are to do with our beliefs, the way we understand the world. That gets really in the way. The beliefs that we have are much more important than we generally think. That's why we put so much emphasis on study here. Because if you have wrong ideas, they distort your experience. And they distort your experience of yourself. They create your experience of yourself. So yes, a lot of the obscurations are to do with beliefs, ideas, views, even quite sophisticated philosophies and so forth, or some not very sophisticated, round the pub. Well, I think it's all like this sort of thing. And on the other hand, there's the obscuration of our emotions, of our passions, of our desires, of our longings, of craving and hatred, envy, greed, etc., 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 the whole terrible crew, as it were. So these all prevent us from experiencing mind as it really is, as it is now. If we could only see the house builder, if we could only destroy the house, then, as it were, you could sort of imagine a house which falls apart and there's just light, just pouring out from within it, just pouring out infinitely, a light that you cannot see, you cannot look into. It's so radiant, so brilliant. That is our minds. But we cover it over with this house, this, as I say, carapace, which obscures its real nature from us. So yes, the conditioned mind too has gone to destruction. The mind, another way of putting it is, the mind has been deconditioned, because what I am is a whole assemblage, a whole congeries of beliefs and ideas and so forth, and of conditions that form us. Conditions really are habits. They're not something intrinsic. They're something added on to the mind. Of course, there are conditions outside us, that's for sure. But even how we experience those, whether we experience them as limiting or not, is conditioned by our own mental conditioning. So yes, the conditioned mind too has gone to destruction. One has attained to the cessation of craving. Phew, let it be so. That's what we come here for. We come here to decondition our minds. So many conditionings. Some of them very, very superficial, cultural conditionings, some of them psychological conditionings from our own early experience and so forth. Some conditionings that we deliberately acquire. We go out and seek them. You become part of some crazy system or a set of beliefs, or you read the paper and you become convinced by some conspiracy theory, etc., etc. The weird ways in which people interpret the world around them. Them, those out there. We actually obscure our own happiness. So we create a false world, a false self, which makes us strangely secure. That's the odd thing about it. It's quite convincing, and we sort of can be sort of happy in our unhappiness. You sometimes see that with people who are, people get causes. They really get virulent about certain causes. And you can see that underneath it, even though the cause may be very worthy, there's actually deep issues in the mind. And I think that if you're trying to change the world, deal with that. So yes, the conditioned mind the mind has been deconditioned. Awareness, in a way I prefer to use that word, awareness. Mind, it gives you an idea of a mechanism, a structure. But awareness itself has been deconditioned. Do you see? We're all aware, but our conditioning is our awareness is structured by our ideas, our beliefs, the results of our past actions, which obscure the truth of the thing, what is actually plain before our noses, or you might even say behind our noses. So one has attained to the cessation of craving. When you cease craving, the conditioned mind disappears. There's just mind, there's just awareness, luminous awareness. When craving ceases, the mind is deconditioned, and you just experience this blissful, radiant, wise awareness. So these are the Buddha's words. This is his song of victory. This is the way it's often spoken of, Vijaya Gatha. At the moment of his enlightenment, these are the words that apparently spontaneously welled up within him. So it's very, very fitting that we hear those words on this particular day. And as I say, I'm sort of dedicating even these words to Triratna Unlimited, because it's unlimited. It's deconditioned. And the whole aim of Triratna is to help many, many women in the future for hundreds of years to decondition their minds and to be free, just as Padmaloka is for men. And I'm passionate about this myself. I really hope this project, well, I don't hope it will succeed. I look forward to it succeeding. I'm sure it will. There's enough will, enough momentum behind it. So, yes, I dedicate these words to Triratna Unlimited. And I'm going to finish by reading the voice of the Buddha. I'm sorry my voice is not the voice of the Buddha, but I'm going to read, as it were, in the voice of the Buddha, those words in Pali. So even if you can't connect the words with any meaning, I hope you can sort of connect them with the exposition I've just given you. Aneka jati sangsarang, sandavisang anibisang, gahakarang gavasanto, dukkha jati puna punang. Gahakaraka ditosi, puna gehang nakahasi, sabbate phasuka bhaga, gahakutang visankatang, visankaragatam chitang, tanhanang kayama jaga. Thank you.